I am here with Mike Bowler. Mike is not only an agile coach with a tremendous amount of years of experience. Mike, I'll probably let you do the intro, but what intrigued me to connect with Mike and record a podcast is his background and curiosity in applied behavioral science, as well as neurology. But Mike, why don't I just pass over the microphone? Guys, meet Mike.
Sure. Thank you. I come originally from a developer background, and I got interested in what would become Agile in 1999. I had been working as a developer. I got frustrated watching projects fail. We'd go and put all of our effort into this stuff, and it wouldn't be what the customers wanted. It was typically late and over budget. So I went looking for a better way to develop software. And what I found was the XP community. And the XP community in 1999 became the Agile community when the manifesto was written. So I've been doing this for about 25 years. But in terms of the behavioral science and the neuroscience and everything else, this started about 10 years ago. So about 10 years ago, I was looking around at all the things that I did as a coach, very strong in technical skills, very strong on process flow, all different things. And I looked at all the things that I did. And my weakest area was that people stuff. What motivates people? How do we get them to get the best results? Why do people do things that are inherently not in their best interest? Understanding the psychology, the people stuff was my weakest area. That's not to say that I was particularly bad at it. It's just of all the things I did, that was my weakest. So I made a deliberate attempt to get better at that. And that's taken me on the craziest journey into neuroscience, psychology, hypnosis, body language, graphology, and a whole bunch of other fields. Trying to understand what makes people tick and how can we get better results.
That's pretty amazing. I can relate to that journey. After a certain amount of time running teams, you start asking why people behave a certain way. Why are things not getting done? I'm particularly always interested in the culture aspect of the team. There's always some kind of a dynamic and you can't really explain it, can't put the thumb on it, but every team has a certain unique dynamic. And if you mess with it, you can really ruin the performance. But by the same token, if you tweak it a certain way in the opposite direction, it can go so much better. And it's always interesting. People forget that engineering is not just about writing code. It's also about people, because nobody writes codes by themselves. So Mike, given your background and fast forwarding 20 years since the start of the Agile, is there anything you've recognized as a miss in the early Agile movement that is a big topic now?
The things we focused on 25 years ago when Agile was just starting are different than the things we focus on today, because some of those things we fixed back then and some of them we just moved on and we changed. I don't know that there were any misses. We hit the things that were most important at the time. We did things like shortening feedback cycle. If we look back 25 years ago, feedback cycles of a month were incredibly fast. So we would talk about Scrum at the time being 30 calendar days. I know today it's typically 2 weeks, but back 25 years ago, it was dictated as being 30 calendar days. And that was aggressive because people were saying, oh, no, we have a 5-year feedback cycle. We're going to collect requirements and we'll do design and we'll do all this stuff. And 5 years later, we'll find out if it's what the customer wanted. So saying, let's look at 30 days was incredible. And yet today, we don't even talk about it. Everybody's at least doing 2 weeks. Sometimes we're pushing things out the same day. So we've sped up those feedback cycles so much. That was probably the right place to start. So when we say, is there a miss? No, I think we addressed the things that we needed to at the time. Obviously, there were 1,000 things we needed to address, and we're only now getting to some of the other ones that came further along.
That's a lot of knowledge picked up over the years. But if you had to concentrate again on the things that are prevalent right now in a modern environment with extremely fast pace and all of the burden that engineers are subjected to, what do you think behaviorally is the number one topic?
From my perspective, the number one topic is still that we're focused on individual accomplishment. We're focused very much on resource efficiency. Are our people busy? Is this person doing the best they can possibly do? And we're lacking the systems view. We're lacking the higher level view of, are we effective as a team rather than just as a bunch of individuals? Because quite often we can see that if we can make a single person more effective, but that actually slows down things in the larger picture. There was just a study on this around AI that I was reading recently that was showing that individual productivity in some measurement and I'm still not convinced that the data is 100% right, but was showing that individual accomplishment was going up, and yet team accomplishment was going down as a result of AI. And what this is telling us is that optimizing for individuals does not help the whole as a system, because one individual cannot write the whole product. And so we need to optimize for the delivery of the whole thing, looking at the entire systems view. And we still are failing to do that in many cases. We're still saying too much. Does Amy have enough work right now? That's focusing on one person. Does this person have the right skills? I'm going to reward people based on what they personally did, not what the team did. And we're not measuring them based on how they helped the team. We're measuring them on what they personally did in terms of delivery. And that is, again, counter to the systems view. So we've optimized one piece, but we didn't optimize the whole. And that's something that's been true for 25 years. We weren't doing it back then. We still aren't doing it today.
Yeah, it's interesting. The industry has started to silo the engineers, especially post-COVID, where everybody started working remote. Remote work is okay if you can structure the right way. But then we overburden people, separate them out, and start measuring them individually. And then we wonder why we have problems with culture, ghost engineers, which is a new topic that just came out, people supposedly not doing the work. Well, maybe
I'm skeptical about the articles on that as well, but
yeah, the same. I just released the article about ghost as well. I'm basically making a claim that the highest performers are not necessarily the ones that are committing the largest amount of code. Let's imagine that we have somebody that doesn't commit at all, but this person is friendly, creates a warm atmosphere, always checks on the entire team, on the morale, passes jokes, is not subjected to criticism of bosses, and just feels like they can ask anything, anyone, especially when something is really not smart, and they just ask the questions and they protect the team. I mean, they may not be contributing a whole lot in terms of code, but they can be binding the whole team. But what's the name of that person in the rowing boat sitting in the back that's just maintaining the rhythm?
Yes.
Right? You would imagine that, hey, that person's not rowing and there's just extra weight on the boat. But in reality, they're the critical component to the entire team.
That's very true. We often have somebody who acts as a catalyst and brings everybody together and helps them grow as a team and helps them improve, but their personal accomplishment may not look that much.
So if this is a huge gap, how does a new engineering manager, let's say, even figure out that they need to possess this knowledge? Where do they go?
That's a tough one to go, because there is no single one place. All the knowledge is fragmented. You have to touch into dozens of different domains to understand the bigger picture. Systems thinking is a good starting point if you want to start looking at that. But really, it's everything. It's not a simple problem. There's so many different areas that we need to understand. But an engineering manager presumably has come up through development and has some understanding of a lot of this already. They just need to understand that they're measuring the right thing. When they're measuring what individuals are doing, they're not looking at the system. We need to be looking at the output of the system. Are we actually delivering what the customers needed when they needed it? Did we do that in a way that was effective? There are measurements that we can take. And if we're measuring flow efficiency rather than resource efficiency, so resource efficiency is how busy people are, and flow efficiency is how well we're getting the work done. If we're measuring that flow efficiency, then we can start to optimize the system and say, this change that I made, did it actually make the flow efficiency better, or did it make it worse? I like to give an analogy of a highway when I'm describing these two. If we imagine a highway that's starting off empty and we start putting cars on it, it doesn't matter whether we're measuring flow efficiency or resource efficiency at the beginning, because adding more cars makes both of them better. Resource efficiency in this example would be how many cars fit on the highway. And flow efficiency would be how many cars get to their destination. And at the beginning, adding more cars means both of those numbers go up. So our flow efficiency gets better. We're getting more cars to their destination, but our resource efficiency also gets better. We're packing more cars on the highway.
Yeah.
But there comes a point at about 60%, where at 60% capacity for that highway, we're adding more cars actually slows down the rate at which we get cars to the highway. And we see this in any queuing system. So when we get into rush hour traffic, we get too many cars on the highway. Now everybody starts to slow down. We're getting more and more resource efficiency. We've packed more and more cars on the same pavement, but fewer and fewer of them are getting to their destination. So once we reach that 60% tipping point, it's really important which one we're measuring. If I'm measuring how many cars fit on the highway, I'll get really good at that, but I'll get hardly any cars to their destination. But if I start measuring cars getting to their destination, now I'm going to end up with fewer cars on the highway. I'm going to do things like metered on ramps so that I restrict the number of cars coming onto the highway. And I'm going to be able to optimize the system in that way, but it matters which one I'm measuring. When we're talking about people in development teams, the thing that we measure tends to be the thing that's easy to measure. I can look at my people and see if they look busy. Does Amy have enough work? I'll give her more work. Hey, Bob, do you have something to do right now? That's easy to measure. And so we tend to measure that, but it's the wrong thing to measure. If we were measuring instead what they were actually accomplishing, what did we get done? Did we satisfy the customer? Did the customer get what they needed when they needed it? If we measured those things, we would have a much better system and everything would go so much more effectively.
Yeah. And then it probably doesn't help that we keep on following the enterprise approach of like 80s and 90s, developing the plan, right? Instead of actually
Right.
going, look, we're going to iterate on this. This is our number one, and we're going to do this as long as it takes to get it to the condition we want. Like, for example, if I would need to race a car in a quarter mile to beat a certain time, I'm going to keep on tweaking it and cycling it again and tweaking it and cycling it again until I reach my goal, because that's where I'm aiming. And I think moving towards the goal based as opposed to iteration based or progress based or metrics of quantities always gets us in trouble.
Because going down that path leads to excess inventory. We go and we build a whole bunch of stuff that's not necessarily valuable to our customer. We built stuff. We shipped a lot of things. We were really busy, but did the customer get what they needed at the end of the day?
Yeah, I love the quote, don't confuse activity with progress.
Yes.
I don't know who said that, but that's always like on my mind. Mike, let's get back to a little bit to like behavioral science and the team, how they function. So you've mentioned that a lot of this knowledge, and it's the same in my experience, you pick up just in the experience, or maybe as you mature into a very senior manager, you start getting the curiosity. How do I start impacting the individuals and teams together? Moving into more of a mentorship coaching model as opposed to the traditional manager, because you've been there many years, you already know, and you start anticipating results because you've already seen certain things play out. But what do you feel that managers need to learn and concentrate on besides just the way that they measure the teams?
The two things that I see managers struggling with the most is one is giving autonomy to their people, and the other is restricting the amount of things in progress. So let's talk about the first one. Autonomy is a critical piece from a behavioral science perspective. Autonomy is one of the three fundamental needs that human has. We need to have autonomy to make our own decisions, to decide what's going on. Now, that doesn't mean that we'll ever have perfect autonomy. There's always rules around us. There's regulations, there's laws, there's rules within the company, there's cultural things that we have to do. So we'll never have 100% autonomy to do whatever we want, but we need to be able to make decisions for ourselves. If we, the team, are deciding that this is the way we want to approach things, we need to be able to do that to be successful, to be happy, to be healthy. These are key psychological needs. If we also look at it from a psychological safety perspective, because we can see that if we're not feeling safe, we are less effective, because when we lack safety, a part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex actually shuts down and we are less able to do higher level rational thinking. One of the key elements behind psychological safety is also autonomy. So it both drives motivation and it also drives safety. Autonomy is a key central piece to everything we do. And yet managers in general, this is not always true. I've met some managers who are great at giving autonomy to their people, but in general, managers struggle with this. They want autonomy for themselves, but they feel uncomfortable giving autonomy to the people that work for them. And sometimes we have to build up trust, and those people need to be able to demonstrate that they're capable of taking that autonomy and not doing bad things with it. But there's things that we can do to get to that place of autonomy without just releasing all the restrictions on day one. If you've seen David Marquet's Ladder of Leadership, He talks about the different models of how you can go from a very strict command and control model to a very permissive, I'm giving you autonomy model, step by step. How do we generally move from one step to the next so that I'm giving you control? But at the beginning, I'm still putting guardrails around it to make sure that I still have veto power. At the beginning, maybe you're coming to me and saying, this is what I intend to do. And I just say yes or no. You still made the decision, but I'm giving myself the ability to say no. Over time, I'm giving you more and more permission. So the ladder of leadership from David Marquet is a brilliant way of getting from where we are to where we need to be with autonomy. But back to the central point, autonomy is so key psychologically, both from a safety perspective and also from a motivation perspective. If we want our people to do their best work, we need to give them autonomy.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, because when I work with my teams, if a team member comes up to me and says, "Hey, Alex, I got to do this. I found a tech debt problem or something else." I really like it when they bubble that information up, and I try to nurture it, because the moment you shut somebody down, they will think twice before approaching you again. And
Yeah.
I actually train my teams. It doesn't mean no, it just means not now. So if I shut something down, it's not because it's not important. It's not because I don't believe you. It's because let's prioritize it and get it in the right timing, because timing is important. And then what I like to implement also is I like to get them back and to say, "Hey, listen, remember you wanted to work on this thing." And somebody's going to be all excited about it. Now it's your chance. And what I do is I try to give them the freedom in tranches, exactly as you described. And I didn't know that I was following this model that was already documented somewhere. And then I would wait for that individual to come up if they hit a roadblock and they have to figure out how to pivot and make it, and they needed somebody to help with the decision. This is where we
Mhm.
start measuring pros and cons. But at that point, I usually train the engineers. Don't approach me with a problem that you haven't thought about yet. Think about it in terms of pros and cons and options. And that makes engineers mature so much faster in their just decision making and working with leadership. They just grow and blossom. I like that perspective. But by the same time, I always try to make sure that, hey, if you get shut down, if this is not it, even if it's decision that goes completely to what you believe, don't be discouraged. It's okay. It means we can get back to it. Just keep it in mind. It's always interesting. It's a balancing act.
Oh, it is. It is absolutely. But we want to get to the point that we have given as much autonomy as we can. Now, there will be a limit. There's always a limit. David Marquet stuff that I'm referencing here, he wrote the book, Turn the Ship Around. He's a former submarine commander, a nuclear submarine commander for the US military. And he was put on this submarine. And the model that they had at the time was that the commander needed to be the person who knew everything. He knew every knob, every switch, every control on the sub. And it was his job to make sure that everybody did their job right. But at the last minute, they put him on a sub that he hadn't been trained on, a different model of sub. And so he showed up and he'd been given this command and control mentality, but he didn't know how anything worked on the sub. And so at the beginning, he made a lot of mistakes as he learned to delegate and as he taught his people to step up. And this is where all of this leadership thing comes from. He talks a lot about intent-based leadership. Fabulous stuff. If you haven't read his book, I do encourage that.
This is awesome. I never read it. I can relate to this as somebody always stepping into the team, and the team has been well formed for a number of years, and you need to lead that team. It's always one of the toughest challenges. How do you win everybody over? And you want to help move in the right direction. So you need, especially if the team is doing certain things wrong, but you don't want to criticize the team and you want to support them somehow. That is challenging. It's not something that anybody learns or there's a class for it. It's something people figure out on the fly. And I wish we were better at it, but I guess we bump heads quite a few times before we get even decent at the skills.
We learn best from making mistakes. It would be awesome if we could all learn from other people's mistakes, but that's not how we as humans tend to learn. We learn from making our own mistakes and correcting.
Yeah, empirical knowledge. So what's interesting, since you work with a lot of teams, what's the most unusual or surprising behavior you've seen within the team settings?
Every team is a little bit different. I've had some teams that were already gelled the moment I arrived. All they needed was new skills because they already did everything correctly. They were already collaborating. They were already talking well. All they were lacking were some actual hands-on skills. So that was easy. I've also worked with teams at the far opposite end that were so dysfunctional that they wouldn't even talk to each other. I had one team where two of the team members wouldn't even sit on the same floor as the other team members. They were off on a different floor because it was so dysfunctional. And so that was all people issue. How do we work with the people and get them back to a better place? So every team's a little bit different. They all have different challenges, different approaches. I don't know that there's sort of any ones that really jump out unless we talk about specifics.
Gotcha. I really liked what David Snowden said in one of the conferences. He was a keynote, and he was, as a sociologist, doing work in software and working with people. He has a very keen eye and observation. And he actually criticized how we build the teams in the first place. Because in the natural setting, let's say we didn't recruit. We just put 7 people together in one room, and they didn't even know who they were. We just randomly plucked them from the street, and we gave them something to do. They would self-form. But in the corporate culture, we have roles, we have hierarchy, we have titles, we have all sorts of different things where we actually nudge somebody to take a certain position and stance within the team. So we force them into something that could be unnatural. And
Absolutely.
is not really great. And number one, we're not even good hiring people because the only thing we test again is things we can measure. Hey, did this person execute the code exercise? Did they complete the lead code by the time that I expect them to complete? Forget the fact that I've been giving this exercise for the past 2 years so I could do it with my eyes closed in 5 minutes. I expect others to do the same thing. Well, that's a little weird. Or we ask them like behavioral things that we don't even understand. Like, color would you be? Who cares? Right? Let's get past the superficial stuff. Let's just try to understand the person and how they would behave. Do you think there's anything that we could do to recruit the engineers better, to probe them for, the great qualities in behaviors?
Certainly, there are a number of companies. Menlo Innovations comes to mind as one of them, where people will come in and you will actually, as part of your interview, you will work with the company for a couple of days. They put you on payroll for a couple of days. They will pay you for this. So it's an extended interview, and it's not just a matter of doing a leak code exercise. It's you're working on real code with the people you would be working with. And it's to find out, are you a good fit? Are you able to work with these people effectively? So there are a number of companies that do that. There are companies where periodically we will allow teams to reassemble on their own. So I worked with one company that had, just as I was arriving, they had gone and reformed all of the teams, but they let the teams decide. They put everybody in a big room and said, here's the constraints. Here's the products we need to build. Here's the things we need to do. There's a whole bunch of constraints around it. You tell me what teams you're going to be in. And they went and assembled themselves into, I think, 5 or maybe 6 teams. And it wasn't a perfect mix. We ended up with some teams that were very heavy on developers and didn't have enough product people, and some teams that were the reverse, too many product people and not enough developers. And at the beginning, it was a little rocky for some of them, but within 3, 5, 6 weeks, they were stabilized, and all of those teams were just screaming along, doing really well because they'd had the autonomy to make decisions for themselves.
Yeah, I like that. This sort of brings back childhood memories when different teams would pick you to be on their soccer team and you just stood there, or you had an opportunity to join and you would just go, you know what? I like their jerseys, and you would just jump with them. And all of a sudden you felt the feeling of belonging. I think people dismiss that a little bit, that it's not just the skill set, it's also the feeling of belonging. Put enough smart people in the room, leave them alone, and they will be able to produce something. But we have this big fear of letting go of control where we want to feel like we're managing them. And I think we always fail. But as far as hiring, that's a very smart thing to do because there's only one way to test an engineer. It's to put them in the setting and see how they do. I've had people join my team and I would let them go in a week or two. And I had people that in one day, they would not only set up their environment, they would get everything running, they would meet everybody and already deliver small, but still deliver a feature. And that's always impressive how there's such a big difference in performers.
Hmm. Yeah. But even one small thing you can do is that I always encourage companies, if you're looking to hire somebody and management has already signed off and that this is the right, make sure that they meet the whole team. If they haven't met the team and the team hasn't said, yeah, we like this person, you're all you've done is you parachuted somebody in who is more than likely going to cause a lot of ripple effect.
Yeah, I miss the team building exercises we used to do in the pre-COVID days. Actually, even before that, because I think the budgets for that have been shrinking for decades now. I think last time all company on hands, just team building and various budgets just to have lunches, go out to bowling and, play a whole bunch of games that always built a lot of camaraderie within the team. You could rely on folks a lot more. This doesn't seem to happen right now, especially with the remote settings, because everybody's trying to be smarter with the
And
budgets. I think that's a big miss. I think again, it's counting dollars in the wrong area.
so the taking this back to the psychological, biological imperative that we have, we as humans co-regulate each other. So when we are in the same space, each of us is helping to co-regulate the emotional state and the behavior of the other people around us. It not nearly as effective remote. Now, I want to caution you that I'm a huge fan of remote working, but well, right now, what I'm saying is that it's more effective for co-regulation specifically if we're all in the same place at the same time. And so there's huge benefit to actually having people come together periodically. I'm not suggesting 2 days a week because I think that's ridiculous, quite frankly. But there is value in coming together maybe once every other month, physically get everybody come back together again so that we can build those bonds, so that we can do that co-regulation and start to build those relationships so that when we are remote, we're just that much more effective. Atlassian did a study last year that they published that had an interesting data point in it, that they found in their own research that there was a drop off in engagement and effectiveness at about 5 months. If people were remote for too long, at about 5 months, they started to lose that engagement. And so they come together 3 times a year now. They bring everybody together 3 times a year to ensure that they keep that engagement going.
That's
That's
interesting.
not 1 or 2 days a week. That's periodically 3 times a year. We all come together. We build those bonds. We build those relationships, and then we go remote and we're amazingly effective.
Yeah. So if there was a small like behavioral change that you could make to drive the biggest impact within the teams, what would it be?
I would have people collaborate more. And I know this sounds silly, but things like mob programming or ensemble programming does wonders for building trust, for building safety, for getting everybody on the same page. It's uncomfortable for people at first. A lot of people say, oh, I don't think I really want to do that. But once they've been in it, once they've done a couple of days of it, they're usually asking, can we get more? This is great.
Be-
We're starting to build trust. Go ahead.
To be honest, like I love the concept of pair programming that came out of XP. People don't seem to practice it now. And it used to be a little painful when we were co-located. But I think in a remote setting, that makes things so much easier because you're looking at the
In
screen,
many ways, it does.
you're plugged in. It's easy to see. The distractions are not there. And it's not like one person's typing, the other person's looking who's walking through the hallway. So I think it's even better in a remote environment, and it builds that culture. The friendships are developed, the jokes get passed. I think you start sharing experiences over the coding battle scars, if you will.
Back to your question of what would be the one thing I would do, I would focus on more collaboration because it impacts everything. It's a little bit easier to have autonomy. If two of us or all of us are saying this is the thing we want to do, we can go and make that decision. We start to build trust amongst ourselves. We start to build up our social status. So we start to feel safer. We're more motivated. It's a win on all counts, higher levels of collaboration. And for me, ensemble or mob programming is the number one tool that I use for that. But there's lots of ways of doing it. Even if it was swarming, where we come together, we decide how we're going to tackle the problem. We all go off individually, but we come back again. Even that is higher levels of collaboration than what we typically do, which is, Alex, this is your piece of work, and this is my piece of work. And then Amy has her piece of work over there. And then when we're done, each of us will say we're done. There's no collaboration there. We're not doing anything that's benefiting us as humans. We're just being busy.
Yeah, this is great. We are huge with my teams on swarming. We pick highest priority item. The entire team meets, decomposes it, and then tackles to resolve it. And the interesting observation is the amount of positive peer pressure that creates. Our expectations with the words unsaid, there is no deadlines, there is no strict timelines and like things that generally are managed outside in, but the team individually knows I have to complete my piece to hand it off to somebody else. It's my responsibility to get there as fast as I can with the best quality that I can. And the unspoken culture just gets so good. We talked about it, but what skills do leaders need to develop? Because I think engineers, they're susceptible to the environment, and the environment, for the most part, is controlled by the leaders. Everybody who looks up to them.
Right. So leaders very definitely need to have a grasp of systems thinking. They need to understand the bigger picture. All too often, leaders, because of the way we've developed our leaders, they they were really good at being technical in one area, and so we promoted them up to management. And so now they're managing people who are good at the thing that they used to be good at. Right. So they have a tendency to fall back into the weeds. And I did this when I first became a manager as well. So I'd been a really good programmer. I got promoted up to manager and I wanted to get into the weeds of what was going on. And I had to learn that I need to give my people the autonomy. I need to be able to say, yes, the solution you came up with, it's certainly not how I would have done it, but it's good enough. It's good enough to satisfy the need. So I had to be able to step away from some of those details and focus on the higher picture. And this is what leaders at all levels need to do, because that was me moving up to a first line manager, somebody who manages the people who do the work. When you move up to the next level of manager, where you're now managing managers, it's again the same thing. You have to step back from what you know and start operating at that higher level. Systems thinking is absolutely critical. Understanding motivation, understanding how people are going to react in certain situations, and looking at that bigger picture, not letting go of the detail. I've worked in companies where people at the VP or senior VP level are asking about details that are going on in a specific team. That's the wrong level. They shouldn't care what's going on inside a specific team.
Yeah, I like that. I think the way that we promote, there's a Peters principle, right? Where we promote in the areas that where we're least effective or knowledgeable. Uh, but I think you're right. I've had managers that code reviewed my code, and I was brought in as a very senior engineer. And I have a manager who really felt compelled to try to explain to me that I should use enums instead of strings. And
Right.
I just felt like off, because that's not really, number one, what the manager should be doing. I can defeat that argument at any time, because if the value changes and I'm using a string, you don't need to have release. You don't need to push any code out. It's just database pass through. But proving that, and just the fact that we're wasting time on something that doesn't add value, was always
Right.
huge. That's the falling back of the somebody who was technical instead of trusting the team.
Right. Because they were really good at a technical skill. And so they want to fall back to the things that they know they're good at. Whereas the new leadership skills, that's something that they're still working on. They're still improving. Now they're going to get there, most of them. Now there is Peter principle, which says that some people have just been promoted above their level of competence and they don't get better. But for managers who are going to continue to get promoted, they will get really good at that and they will learn to let go. But so that's in terms of what do I tell leaders that they have to do? Learn to trust your people.
Yeah. I have a question for you. This one is interesting. Obviously, Agile is known for the biggest bickering around estimation that you could ever imagine. And there are challenges within teams around two very basic principles, right? One is the Parkinson's law, which is work will consume the time allotted. One is a procrastination effect, where if you don't have a deadline or a timeline, how do you actually deliver? Because things will drag on and on. From your,
Well, this,
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
Okay. Oh, there's so many things to unpack in here. But first of all, for that second one, we need to look at the motivation model. And so if we consider we want people to be fully intrinsically motivated, because if they are intrinsically motivated, you'll never have that. Parkinson's law of things that filling the available space. No, if people are intrinsically motivated to finish the work, they will get it done because they're excited about it. The work itself is inherently interesting and challenging, and they're loving it, and they will get stuff done. It's when people are doing things out of a sense of obligation that we get all of those problems. That, yeah, the work will fill the available space. So we want to shift people over to the model. I'm not sure if I am able to share anything here.
Yes, there's a share button.
Let me try.
I'm very curious now.
All right. So this is what I'm trying to share. All right. So you see that
Yes.
with amotivated on the far left and intrinsic motivation on the far right.
Yes, sir.
This is the motivation model from self-determination theory. Self-determination theory is focused on the basic fundamental human needs. And the motivation model goes from amotivated on the far left, which means there's absolutely no motivation at all, to intrinsic motivation on the very far right. When we're talking about things like, if I give the people the work, but I don't give them a deadline to chase after them, that's because we are further on the left. We are getting them to do work probably because of compliance, external rewards and punishments. That's the external in the red on the left. Whereas if people were fully intrinsically motivated, if they were on the right-hand side, either fully on the right in intrinsic, where I love this work, it feels great, they will just get stuff done. They don't need to be motivated. They don't need to be given a deadline. Nobody needs to crack the whip. They will just get it done. If they're an integrated, they're doing this because they believe themselves. This is who they are. I am a good developer and I get stuff done. So I'm integrated. Even if I'm not enjoying the work itself, this is who I am. Then we get to identify doing it this way. I want to get that promotion. If I know that if I do this work, I'm going to get the promotion or I'm going to get the raise. Interjected is I've got this internal nagging of I really should get it done. And this is where we're starting to have delays, the whole Parkinson's law and the other stuff, that I'd better get it done, but perhaps I'm not going to get it done as effectively as I could have. Externals into reward, compliance, external rewards, punishments. And of course, amotivated means it doesn't matter. If it gets done, it's just a coincidence because I had no interest in getting it. So if we want to get around that and we want people to be truly motivated, we need to focus on getting them as far to the right as we possibly can. That means making the work interesting, making it a challenging environment. This is where if we're focused on through collaboration, people tend to be enjoying themselves more. They tend to be, as we're doing that, getting that enjoyment, we're shifting to the right in this model. So back to your question of how do we get people to be delivering well without all of those extra rewards? It's shifting the motivation to the right.
So this is awesome. I do have questions naturally. And the question is, it's easier to see how you could take one individual, and to shift their motivation to the right. The challenge, however, is everybody on the team is different. You can't move the entire team over. There will be people still with different levels of motivation. And
That's certainly true.
so how do you keep them all shifting to the right?
And this is where anything that we do that truly has collaboration, where we're truly having fun, is going to be shifting us to the right. Now, your point is that everybody's a little bit different. Absolutely. As we're starting to do maybe mob programming or we're swarming or whatever the activities are, we're having some social time, we're having some fun. Some of those members are going to be all the way in the green. Some of them might only make it as far as the orange identified. Some of them might get into integrated. But the point is everybody's going to shift a little bit. If we keep doing these exercises, we'll shift even further.
Yeah, this reminds me of sports again. You know how you grab a kid and you put them into the great team and they grow and become great real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Versus grab a kid, put them in the mediocre team and they just become mediocre. What creates the environment? Is it the individual, or does the environment make the individual? And I think it's one of those yin yang type of moments where it depends. It depends on which phase.
Yes. There's so many different factors that go into it. Sometimes you can just have the wrong mix of people and it doesn't matter what you do. They're just not going to gel. They're not going to work well together. Although that's rare. When in a situation like that, we need to give people the opportunity to shift out, to move to a different team. I've seen so many people who were just horrible in the place they were in, but when given the opportunity to go to a different team, just thrived in that new team. So when we do have a team that's not gelling, let's look at who the players are. Let's identify, maybe it's just you've got two great players who just can't work together.
Yep.
I had a very early team in my career when I was one of the earliest teams I'd done with Agile. I had two people who were both extremely talented, but for whatever reason could not work together. Because whenever they were together, they would push each other's buttons and they would just get each other worked up. And it was horrible. But they were both good people. They could not work together. And so we ended up losing both of them. Had I been better at leadership at the time, because it's a process, we learn, we get better. Had I been better, I would have been able to keep one of them.
Yeah, that's a very honest review. Folks leave all the time, and sometimes you learn later things that could have done better. I'm on the same boat, experienced the same things. Mike, I have one final thought here that I wanted to explore with you. And that is, with all of this agile sucks and agile doesn't work noise, what's your take on this?
Yes, none of this is easy. It's all hard work. If we want to get better, it's a lot of hard work. What we are hearing with the agile is dead. And frankly, I've been hearing this for 20 years. I've been hearing agile is dead almost from the moment the ink was still wet on the manifesto. But we've been hearing that. But what the people are really talking about is the hype cycle. They're talking about all the hype of agile is going to fix every problem we've got. If you don't put in the effort, it won't. Because fixing these things is hard work. There is no magical silver. I can't just sprinkle pixie dust on your team and everything will be magic. We have to put in the work. We have to actually get better. But there were too much overhyping too early. We're seeing the same thing with AI right now. AI will solve all of your problems. No, it'll solve some of them. But the hype is making it sound like it's massive and it's going to be spectacular and awesome. And the reality is a lot smaller than that. It's the same as the reality with Agile. You need to put in the work if you want to get the benefit.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So, Mike, you are extremely experienced in this. It sounds like you've done a lot here working with the teams. I'm sure viewers and other people seeing it may want to learn more. Where are you? How to reach you?
Yeah, I'll give you some links to share in, I'm assuming you have show notes. I'll give you some links to share in there, but I do have 3 separate blogs. Why 3 is an open question. I debate regularly with whether it should be 1 or 3, but I have 3 separate blogs aimed at different audiences. One is very specifically focused on the behavioral science here, unconscious agile. One is more focused on flow and Kanban and that sort of thing. And one is focused on technical practices. So I'll give you links for all of those. And generally, I am an independent coach. I am available for hire to help your teams wherever you are.
Hey guys, and you should seriously consider speaking with Mike. So Mike, thanks again. This was awesome. I know this is the second conversation that we have, and I've learned a ton again, really priceless information. I wish more people knew about this stuff. And again, thanks for your curiosity, learning about this, and obviously sharing it with others and joining the podcast to share more on these topics.
Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure.